Councilmember Redmond.
Here.
Councilmember Collins.
Here.
Councilmember Stearns. Mayor Pro Tem Sackler.
Here.
And Mayor Kluwer is absent.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 3, presentations, special presentations. There are none, unless it's changed, no? And so we move on to public comment. We'll start with people in-house and then go to Zoom calls, et cetera. So who would like to go first? Nancy? Come on up. 3 minutes, Nancy.
I have here copies of some pictures and email if you guys don't remember it.
So Nancy, start with your name and where you live.
Nancy Jandro. I am the owner of Haircuts at 210 East Castle. And I sent an email on April 6th regarding some issues that both myself and Debbie Castro at the main event are having with Crave Restaurant. Their garbage cans are constantly left out on the street, on Castle Street. I have pictures here showing on May 12th at 5:15. That's the day that the pickup was in the morning. That was April 12th. On April 13th, the garbage cans were still out in front of on Castle Street. This is a continual thing. Most people who have garbage pickup on Castle leave their garbage cans, or on Chestnut, leave their garbage cans in the alley. He does not do that. They continually park in the 2-hour parking spots, which I have several pictures, dated times or days, of which they have both the red pickup with organ plates and a small sedan. You can see on the April or the May 18th picture, the red pickup and the small sedan are both their employees and the owner, which they leave parked out there all the time. It's 2-hour parking. I do have my vehicle parked out there right now because I am recovering from foot surgery, but normally my car is not there. It's the blue Xterra. I sent an email with pictures about their wood pile that fell into our parking area, of which I was told it was a civil matter, but I still have concerns about whether that's a public nuisance and unsafe for the people in the area. We are in the downtown business core. This is not public or private area. It is the downtown business core. I don't ever see Pipeline or Sparky's leaving their garbage cans on the boulevard. I don't believe it's right that they should be able to constantly leave their garbage cans there. It is 2-hour parking, and even though it may not be taken up all the time, there are many times in those pictures that show that there are most of the parking lot places taken up, and they still have theirs parked there day in and day out. The pile of wood is being stacked again in an unsafe condition, which just leaves it to fall again. And next time, is it going to hurt somebody or damage somebody's vehicle? Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Do we have another in-house public speaker? Come on up.
The First Amendment states, quote, "Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people to petition for a redress of grievances," end quote. Under my First Amendment right, the more I speak to you, the more grievances follow. After my last speech, a council member drives by me walking my dog in front of my house and shouts out, "I will spell it for you. Dogfucker." I thank 2 council members for speaking at length with me about what they deem is my problem. Their solution that they share is for me to simply ignore the continual verbal abuse. I've tried that for 8 years, and that approach has only emboldened my attacker. In your last meeting, I spoke of how these years involved the Mount Shasta Police Department and spoke of intimidation from this city council. More intimidation was clearly evident as I approached the front door of this building that evening. I'm roughly 30 feet away from the door. Mr. Redmond is 15 feet in front of me speaking to Mr. Gibson. Mr. Collins is 15 feet to my left exiting his car. As Mr. Gibson opens the front door, Mr. Redmond calls me, and again, I will spell it for you. Fucktard. Would anyone in this room like to argue that that is not intimidation? God works in mysterious ways. During my second appearance this year, while I am on my knees in front of this city council, sharing the Lord's Prayer sung beautifully by Andrea Bocelli, Mr. Redmond cries out, quote, "Cut his mic," end quote, and soon later, quote, "Crazy," end quote. The next meeting, 22nd Avenue, does exactly that. The music can just barely be discerned, and my position on the floor is not seen at all by the cameras. Seems like 22nd Avenue is well versed in abridging my First Amendment right. Lastly, on my next appearance on 4/24/23, 22nd Avenue has mislabeled the meeting on YouTube as a Planning Commission meeting.
All right, Kathy, do you have anyone online that wants to speak in public comments?
There are no hands raised.
All right, so we'll close public comment.
Can I ask one question?
Not really, no.
I just want to know if you will respond to what I
No.
said.
No, we don't respond to anything in the public comments section of this agenda. Yeah.
Because you didn't respond to my email either, so I'm just curious. Thank you.
All right, so agenda item number 5, council and staff comments. We'll start with city manager.
Yes. And Councilman Stearns may want to weigh in on this. This relates to the old hospital, and we talked about the receivership process, and they're from the part of the Bay Area Receivership Group who has been working on this project, the idea that with the amount of environmental issues with the property and tear down costs versus what they believe they can sell the property for, they're seeing it as having negative equity. So we took a different approach last Thursday to the judge, where we looked for the judge to order the property owner to abate within 90 days. The code issues out here, including what we see as the appropriate measure, which is demolition. So the judge issued a continuance for 90 days. We're due back on the 18th, and if the property owner hasn't done anything, then the judge will find this person in contempt, and the judge has recommended that we move this property into receivership, where I don't, and maybe you can shed some light on this, the receivership piece. I believe they're transferring the idea of having the receivership work being done by John Noreen of Kenny and Noreen, and for John Noreen to put together that writ.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's going to be a transfer to Kenny and Noreen or not. The trustee or the receiver indicated that he would be willing to act as the receiver if the judge were to appoint him with certain conditions, which were in his proposed order, which I anticipate will probably be in the order that Attorney Noreen will send to the judge.
Okay, thanks. So an issue that has been raised by our fire chief is, wanted me to reach out to the county to see what their position is on safe and sane fireworks. And the Board of Supervisors was strongly against it last year, and the county administrator officer put out a resolution that strongly suggested that members of the public not use safe and sane fireworks. I contacted Ed Valenzuela. The board hasn't discussed it this year. It believes they'll be in the same boat this year, and Angela Davis, the county administrative officer, is reworking the resolution from last year. So it sounds like they're strongly discouraging safe and sane. Our chief would like to get a read from council on where they stand on safe and sane fireworks, given that it would be great if we could give our vendors fair notice of whether or not they can sell in the city and, add to booster funds, et cetera. So a lot more going on. Those are the two big things right at the moment.
All right. Chief, you have any comments maybe about what one of our public commentators was talking about, Crave versus haircuts? Is there anything for us to do at all as a council? The parking rules are the parking rules and so forth, right?
Right, and I've addressed those issues with both code enforcement and with the city manager. We've responded to her. She doesn't like our answers on some of the things. The wood pile is not a nuisance. It's not a public nuisance. If it caused damage to her property when it fell over the snow, that's something she can litigate. The code enforcement officer is aware of the trash cans and will be looking to enforce the trash cans. This has been an ongoing between the two businesses down there. So code enforcement is going to look into and typically with the Crave restaurant, when there's been an issue, code enforcement addresses it and they correct it. So we will be talking with the trash can. So it is being addressed.
And I don't know if there is, I guess it doesn't matter, who the precipitating party is. There's been a back and forth. It's been a long-going thing. And if there was something that the city can step in on, we will. From everything we've received from the speaker, other than the trash, it has all risen to something that needs to be taken care of if they choose this route in civil court.
Anything else, Chief?
Just real quick, we have available at the police department. I've given council member each one of them. It's just to protect yourself, what to do for the trends of identity theft. It's just a small packet. I'll have them here at each of our council meetings for people to pick up, and we'll be providing them to the public. But again, you got questions about identity theft, who to report it to, what to look out for. Pamphlets are free, and they're at the police department for anybody to pick up.
Very good. Muriel, would you like to comment at this time? I know you have the budget to go over. Okay. And council members, Jim, anything like this? No. John? All right, let's move on to committee updates, if there are any.
None.
All right, we dispatched item number 6. Now we move on to the consent agenda. Before I get started reading this rather long list of items, are there any that council members would like to pull for further discussion, correction, etc.?
No, simply request that approval of minutes be broken out separately from the others, because I was not at the last meeting. I could not vote on that.
Okay, so Kathy, do I simply do the consent agenda A and have it approved by the, yeah, okay. All right, so here we go. Consent agenda. The city manager recommends approval of the following consent agenda items. All resolutions and ordinances on this agenda or added hereto shall be introduced or adopted as applicable by title only, and the full reading thereof is hereby waived. A, approval of minutes, May 8th, 2023, regular city council meeting. I'll stop there. Can we get a motion to approve just that one?
Motion to approve the minutes of May 8th, 2023.
By title only.
By title only.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We move on. B, approval of disbursements, accounts payable May 4th and May 10th, 2023, total gross payroll and taxes for period ending May 18th, 2023. C, second reading and adoption of ordinance CCO-23-04, Chapter 19.03 of the Mount Shasta Municipal Code, Parklet Dining. D, second reading and adoption of CCO-23-05, amending Mount Shasta Municipal Code, Section 6.04, Garbage, Refuse, and Solid Waste. E, second reading and adoption of CCO-23-06, amending Mount Shasta Municipal Code, Section 12.08, repair and maintenance of sidewalks. F, recommendation of award, Oak Street Area Water System Improvements Project, resolution number CCR-23-12. G, city manager's report from May 10th, 2023. H, resolution CCR-23-13, approving a change to the date of Downtown Enhancement Advisory Committee meetings. And lastly, I, monthly investment report for April 2023. Somebody please make a motion for that.
Motion to approve consent agenda.
I second the motion to approve 7
Thank
B
you.
through I.
All right, so this is for B through I. We have a motion from Redmond, a second by Stearns. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Agenda number 8, Mount Shasta 2023 through 2031 Housing Element Public Review Draft. City manager is going to introduce this, possibly with some help from Plan West partners. Or not.
So, long time coming.
Yeah.
We have had extended public comment period, and those comments have all been compiled. In this version of the housing element, what we've done is pared it down to what is required by California state law and the elements that are required by HCD to accept this. We have a deadline that we need to meet. We lost a little time and in that we brought it before the Planning Commission twice. There were some members of the public and some members of the Planning Commission that wanted to make sure that they understood the document fully. And, they recommended sending it to City Council. The thing to keep in mind here, above and beyond that, what we have in this document is what HCD requires. All this body is doing is recommending that we send the housing element on to HCD. And so what happens there? HCD will review it, and probably over a year's period of time, they will come back to us and we'll negotiate. They will tell us things that they expect us to have in the housing element additionally, and we'll need to comply. I mean, if we don't get the housing element adopted, if we're looking for state grant funds in any way, shape, or form, we can't apply because we don't have our housing element done. And, we're in good shape. We're hoping that the work that we've done with Mountain Townhomes will allow us, for HCD to say, yes, we've met our RENA goals for this cycle. And that's great. But, yeah, so this has been pretty well vetted. I'm sure folks will have some additional comments on it, but I want to introduce Michelle Nielsen and Vanessa Blodgett from Plan West, who've been hanging in here through this entire process.
Great, thanks Todd, and thanks everyone for having us here this evening. And we do have a brief presentation that we would like to do that provides a high-level overview of what's in the housing element, because it is a very long, dense document and highly technical in some cases to address all of the state laws that are required. So we will get into that in it is up there, it looks like. All right, there we go, great. So once again, I am Vanessa Blodgett. I am a principal planner with Plan West Partners, and with me is Michelle Nielsen. And then we did have some other staff on our team helping us prepare this document. And we are here tonight to provide you an overview of the housing element, what's in it, and the process to date that Todd just did summarize some of it. And then provide a summary of the key findings and recommendations in the programs that are in the document itself. We did appreciate the Planning Commission and public review process to date, and the draft that was included in your packet does include an underlined strikeout version of the document to show the revisions that were made to address those comments. And then the requested action tonight is just to submit the draft to HCD. It's not adopting the document yet. It's really just to submit it to HCD, get their review and comments, and hopefully there's not a whole lot left to address once we get HCD's letter back. And then we are happy to answer any questions as we go through and at the end of our presentation. So next slide, please, Michelle. So as a reminder, the housing element is a mandatory element of the general plan that's updated every 8 years. It must be certified by HCD, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and the city also must report annually on progress on implementing the housing element programs. And those annual reports are typically due around March and April. And as Todd mentioned, that matters because there are funding programs that require the city to have a certified housing element to be eligible to apply for funding, certain funding opportunities. Next slide, please. And so the housing element, it provides an assessment of necessary conditions for developing and preserving an adequate supply of housing, including housing affordable to all income levels. And local governments must adequately plan to meet existing and projected housing needs, and including their fair share of their regional housing needs allocation. It is a planning document that really sets the table for housing for all residents in the community, but it doesn't commit the city or require the city to develop housing or approve any specific housing project. It's really just providing the conditions to allow housing to be developed. Next slide, please. And how did we get here? So it's been almost a year since we were last in front of the council. And so we did conduct some stakeholder and community outreach, had meetings. There was a community survey that was conducted in October and November of 2022. And the full results of that survey is included as Appendix E in the housing element. And we also, in that appendix, included all of the comment letters, written comments that we received since the draft was released at the beginning of April. And then we did in April and May review the draft and revised draft with the Planning Commission at that time. Next slide, please. So now we will just get into what's in it. The chapters, the introduction includes and key acronyms and definitions to hopefully improve the readability of the document. Chapter 2, it sets forth the city's strategy, the goals, policies, and programs to address housing needs. And then Chapter 3 is an analysis of the previous housing element programs, and some of these have been completed, some have been carried forward and are combined into with other programs in the current draft of the housing element. And then there are a number of very technical appendices. Appendix A is the needs assessment, B is the sites inventory, C has funding resources, D is the glossary, and E is the outreach and community engagement. Next slide, please. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Michelle for her to just briefly get into some of the comments and the Appendix A.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, City Council, for having us this evening and allowing us to attend virtually. As Vanessa indicated, we did receive several comment letters since the document was posted in early April, April 15th. We had the 2 Planning Commission meetings, and in response to the public input we received and the Planning Commission commissioners' input, we made numerous corrections to typos. We clarified a lot of the text to make it hopefully more easy to understand. We were also alerted to some updates. We had some outdated information regarding the Carmen Drive housing development. Specifically, that was in Chapter 3. There was reference in Appendix A to Rockville House. That was a facility that provided housing for people who are experiencing disabilities, if I recall correctly, but they have since closed. Alder Gardens was a assisted housing development, and we had a conversation with the previous property manager who specialized in property management of subsidized housing developments, and they were no longer working for the property owners. So it was their understanding and changed hands, but we don't really have more information about that development at this point. We also added reference to junior accessory dwelling units. We added the definition, which is from state law. That appears in Chapter 1 and Section 7. It also appears in the glossary appendix. And that there was programs in Chapter 2 that didn't mention junior accessory dwelling units. And so there was concern that that the lack of not including JADUs, that could be interpreted that those programs didn't extend to junior accessory dwelling units, so that, which was not the intent. So we added those specific references to make it clear. Also, in response to public and planning commissioner comment in Appendix A, we added summaries about SB 9. That is what people often refer to as like the duplex housing law. Where on a qualified basis, basically a site has to meet very specific list of parameters in zones that allow single-family development. They could potentially do a duplex or 2. It's not necessarily a duplex; it would be 2 housing units. SB 35 is a newer law. I think it went into effect in 2018. Provides for ministerial streamlining for qualified housing projects. The site has to meet numerous eligibility requirements. I think it's the same list as you see SB 9. Some of the disqualifiers to use SB 9 or SB 35 relate to the presence of wetlands, the site being located in a very high fire hazard zone, amongst others. So probably the number of property owners who could take advantage of these two initiatives from the state is probably a pretty small group because of the presence of wetlands in Mount Shasta and also the very high hazard areas in the city too. And then something that's newer is new as of, I think it was late April, early May, is the Housing Crisis Act. Mount Shasta, along with the city of Wairika, are now one of the 94% of cities in the state of California that have been designated an affected city. And the reason Mount Shasta is now listed where they previously weren't was with the U.S. Census, they made updates to what is an urbanized area. The population they went through the census process, and an affected city is urbanized areas with a population greater than 5,000 people in an urban cluster, and Mount Shasta has both those. So it's in that 94%. So what does that do? What does that mean for Mount Shasta and other cities and counties in the state? There's limits on downzoning parcels, limits on imposing moratorium on residential development. If the city were to decide to adopt new design standards for housing and they were not objective, they couldn't do that. But the city's existing standards, because they were adopted before this went into effect, those still stand and are still the city can certainly use them for their process. I did look into that carefully because I know that's important for the city. Another thing is for assisted housing developments, which I mean housing developments that receive subsidies, there's limits on converting those or demoing them should they, like once their subsidies expire. So that's probably the frequency these things would get kicked up and affect development in Mount Shasta is probably not too frequently, but it's something to be aware of just as city council and for the public. So that's why we added the summary to just share that information with the community. So water and sewer priority, there's a state law, this has been in place for actually more than a decade, where a housing development, if it includes lower income units, assisted lower income units, those are to receive priority on their water connections. Another thing that received a lot of updates and we'll discuss later in this presentation is sites that were identified to meet the RENA. So there was got a lot of good input from the community and from the Planning Commission, and made those changes in response to that input we heard. Okay, so these next couple of chapters or slides just kind of walk through some of the key takeaways. So the housing needs assessment, what that is it has to be a comprehensive update with new data that reflects the changes in demographic conditions and projected housing needs. So reflect just changes over time and changes in your community. Constraints to housing, that also has to be updated to reflect, bring that current to from the last housing element. The assessment of fair housing, that's based on a new state law requirement. So in terms of some key takeaways here for Mount Shasta, overall the population is declining, but the number and percentage of residents who are 65 and older has increased since the last census and since 2015. The size of households are declining. More residents rent their homes than own. There's a significant portion of residents, both homeowners and renters, who are cost burdened. That means they pay 30% or more of their gross income towards housing. It's usually that affects renters more, but there's a significant portion of homeowners that are being affected and are cost burden. The cost of housing is high in Mount Shasta. I'm sure that's pretty well-known fact. The vacancy rate is low. There are some portions of the zoning code that are constrained, but at the same time, there's some portions of the zoning code that really do hit the mark, do well. In terms of the assessment for fair housing, so much of Mount Shasta is considered to be a high resource area, indicating high levels of employment, close proximity to jobs. People who live in Mount Shasta, a lot of them work in Mount Shasta. There's access to effective educational opportunities for both children and adults in the community. There's a low concentration of poverty and low levels of environmental pollutants. Probably a lot of reasons why folks love the city so much. There are some fair housing issues. There is a shortage of housing that's affordable and accessible to seniors, the workforce, persons with disabilities. There's a disproportionate housing needs. That's really referring to those cost burden households, those owners and renters who are paying 30% or more of their gross income towards housing, which increases their risk for displacement if the property changes hands, increases, or the rent increases. Those can be actions or things that happen that would may cause a family or a household individual to be displaced. Another is a housing condition and habitability. But it was actually, the housing condition and habitability was actually, was trying to remember it was not as bad as some areas, more urban areas will experience. So let's see here. So the inventory of sites, this definitely received a lot of attention with the public and with the Planning Commission. So a good place to start would be the city's fifth cycle housing element. That would be the one that was prepared, I believe, in 2014. The environmental constraint that was really only looked at in that one and used as a factor to look at sites was flooding, if there was a flooding hazard. With this a review of sites, we looked at other environmental constraints, the community, wetlands, brownfields, flood hazards, the presence of streams and water bodies, fire hazard severity, those types of things. One thing to keep in mind when looking at the sites and the sites data is that it doesn't constitute a clearance if a site is listed or a constraint is identified. It's using publicly available data, like the North National Wetlands Inventory was used for wetland, but augmented with local information. Flood hazards is the FEMA data. So it doesn't constitute a clearance of a site that there's no issues because this information is at a high level, programmatic level. It's not intended to be at a site-specific development. So to kind of give you an idea of where the constraints are. So it doesn't mean that, provide, that there's no wetlands. There would have to be, a site clearance done at the site level by a qualified professional. And so the reason we had this more comprehensive analysis was just to have the housing element comply with state law. And as you can see on this slide, there's some standards that have to be met for a site to be identified as a RENA site, which for Mount Shasta would be a site that's qualified for lower income households. It has to have a minimum density of 15 dwelling units per acre. Infrastructure has to be at the site, or there has to be a plan for infrastructure to be at the site within the planning period of 8 years. The site has to be larger than half an acre and less than 10 acres. It also has to be zoned to allow residential development, multifamily development. So those are why there was a lot of work to do that, to find sites. But I think I'm now, let's see. I guess I'm going through this. In terms of what we're recommending the city council do is the site where the Mountain Townhomes has been approved with the conditional use permit and the architectural review for the project. It meets the city's RENA goals from the state. The city, along with I think every other city, incorporated city in Siskiyou County, has a RENA goal of 2 lower income units. One that is for up to 80% area median income household would be the benchmark, and one unit that's for an extremely low income household, and that benchmark is 30%. And the developer who received the entitlement and the funding he's using, the funding has a mix of both lower income units and extremely low income units. And the development's going to overall have 24 assisted units. So we're recommending that this site be submitted to HCD because there's a provision in state law that allows a city to use a site that's been approved for development, but the building permit has not been issued if that occurred before the housing element was adopted, which this one, from what we can find in the available information, this site meets all the characteristics, all the requirements of state law. So our recommendation is that this site for Mountain Townhomes be submitted to the state for RENA. And in terms of going over more briefly over the other appendices, Appendix C is about funding sources, state and federal funding that's available. Appendix D is a glossary, just the technical and language and jargon. Appendix C is the public outreach and community engagement, also includes the October survey results. And we have comment letters that we have received as of May 17th. I know there was a letter that was submitted after May 17th, but so that will be added to Appendix E and submitted as part of the housing element. I think we only received one. Okay, so let's see here. And I think I missed my cue. So let's see here. To comply with state housing law, the housing element must identify programs that altogether are a strategy. And this slide has bullets that we're just going to walk through. These are all from state law. These are what the programs need to do. They need to identify sites with appropriate zoning and development standards and services to accommodate the locality's share of the regional housing needs for each income level. This is the Mountain Townhome site. Assist in the development of workforce housing and housing affordable to lower income households. So this is making information more available to the public, encouraging the development of accessory dwelling units or junior accessory dwelling units. What else? The city working with developers for workforce housing and other types of housing projects. Removing governmental constraints and other constraints to housing maintenance, improvement, and development for all income levels. So facilitating those processes, the city already has some practices in place, working with Great Northern, providing technical assistance for some rehab type projects to individual property owners. So it's just enhancing those and continuing those forward. promoting fair and equal housing opportunities, including addressing disparities in housing needs and access to opportunities, conserving and improving existing housing, including assisted housing that is at risk for conversion to market rate housing. I think we have one more here. And maximizing housing opportunities throughout the community. So the strategy, the key approaches to doing meeting those objectives is, I kind of mentioned some of them, provide additional support to all housing programs. Where the zoning code is a constraint, which there's some inconsistencies with state law that need to be addressed. Are being the main ones, just giving implementing those zoning code updates to bring the city's zoning code consistent with current state law, providing for workforce housing, that housing is an economic development issue, improving housing information and availability of housing information for residents. And so to help people navigate better through Chapter 2, because it is very lengthy, and so we've used some icons with the California icon indicating programs that fulfill a specific state housing requirement, and those that are meaningful actions to affirmatively further fair housing are shown with the equal housing ones. And those should also be read to be mandatory, because affirmatively furthering fair housing is a mandate of state law now. So digging down a little further, some of the older housing laws that require programs are related to emergency shelters, manufacturing housing, allowing those on lot zone for conventional stick-built single-family dwellings, approved allowances for group homes, update the definition of family, which we find to be fairly common for jurisdictions that program they need, bringing the zoning consistent with the requirements for transitional supportive housing, and written procedures for to prioritize water and sewer to affordable housing developments. Some of the newer laws that require programs include accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. When HCD receives the housing element for Mount Shasta, it'll go over to another part of their organization, and they'll review the city's accessory dwelling unit regulations, and they'll probably issue a separate letter. That's pretty common as well. They just reviewing it for compliance with state law. Firmly furthering fair housing, provisions for emergency and transitional housing. There was updates 2019, 2022. There's new requirements for by right permanent supportive housing developments, replacement housing, no net loss, Housing Accountability Act. State density bonus law is being amended almost every year. So probably an approach for that is to try to incorporate the definitions, the very technical definitions in state law, to avoid having to revisit the city's ordinance every year. So that as those change, the city's regs change by referencing those state laws. And the Housing Information Transparency Act, that's tasked jurisdictions to just improve the availability information about housing programs and that information to the public using their webpage and their public counter, improving those resources for people. So next steps, I think we've kind of reviewed this. Like Todd said, what the city council is doing would just be authorizing submittal of the housing element to HCD. It's not adoption. And make revisions. It should, based on any community input and city council input we hear. And then it's submitted to HCD. The soonest it can be submitted is about June 7th. From there, HCD has a 90-day review period. Our experience is they use the full 90 days, and they will in all likelihood, provide comments, but hopefully they're not too onerous, and to revise the draft housing element in response to those comments. And then adoption. So as it is a adoption of part of the general plan, there would be hearings before the Planning Commission and City Council. And then once it's adopted, it is submitted to HCD for a 60-day review period. And this is a certification review, finding, they do their review to find if it meets state law. And then hopefully we get a certification letter on that 60-day review. So, as in your staff report, staff is recommending that the City Council receive and consider public comments, and then take action at the pleasure of the City Council, obviously, but to authorize the city manager to transmit the draft housing element to the California Department of Housing and Community Development for the 90-day review period. That's all I have. We are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you both from Plan West. Appreciate that. And let's see what kind of questions we have, if any. Questions? You do? Okay. You have the floor.
First of all, thanks. Thanks for getting what I'm sure is a whole lot of work to get here. Just a few questions. I'm trying to understand some of the bigger numbers, like what are our objectives? And when we've got 58 new construction, when it says objectives, is that like our mandate from the state that we need to come up with 58 new construction housing units in the next 8 years? And if that's so, does that include the 25 that are going to be on, that you brought up later in the presentation?
So those objectives are the city's objectives. Those are not coming from the state, and it does include those 25, I believe, units that were approved recently for the mountain townhomes. And so the city's objectives would be to get additional units constructed beyond that.
Where did these numbers come from? Do they come from the state?
Those ones came from working with city staff.
Okay. And can you tell me the other two categories? I don't understand the distinction between the 9 properties they want to rehab versus the 28 that they want to go through some preservation, which, can you help me understand what those two things mean?
So the preservation would be units that would be that are currently receiving subsidies, and if they were going to expire. There are two housing, the Alder Gardens, their subsidies may have expired. We don't have confirmation of that, but that may have happened. Their subsidies were set to expire last year. And it's possible for a property owner to seek new funding sources to continue to keep them subsidized, but they don't have to do it. They do have, if they were going to ask tenants to leave, there are some requirements under state law for that. So that would be the preservation. The rehab would be units that they're in the deteriorating condition. And it's not that there's specific units in the city that have been, Joe's house or Susie's house. It's not state mandated. We work with city staff on that, but to ensure that the existing housing stock that might be older may need to be repaired, that there's encouragement to do that, or, yeah.
And what is state mandated is for the city to identify quantified objectives. So the city has to identify some objectives in this table. So for each of these categories, the city has to identify a certain number of units in each of these categories.
Oh.
Joe's house is a mess, so we're going there. Thank you. After just what are our objectives, one of the big categories is what's our median income? I've found 4 different answers. This is all in Appendix A. Anywhere from Table A13 to A14. On 13, it's got Mount Shasta at 43,000, Siskiyou at 47,000. Now, it says household income. I'm assuming it just takes the multiplier of 1.8, which is roughly where we are. But you go right down to the next one in A14, table A14. Then for a family of 4, it's $52,000 versus table A19 in 2022. By the way, that was family of 4 in 2019, but in 2022, it's the median of family of 4 is $80,000. Something's not right here, and I don't have any idea which way is what. You're the pros, I thought I should ask.
No, that's a great observation and a great question. And the data sources that we use for those tables is from different places and takes into account different things. And one is using the annual median income, which is one way to account for it, and then a way to benchmark it. And then some of it takes into account more federally based data that has a different definition and takes into account different data when they are compiling that information.
Where I'm looking for a winner here, and the reason I'm looking for a winner is we have some objectives, and some of them are cut up by income categories, low, very low, moderate, et cetera, and I'm just trying to find out which set of those numbers are the ones we need to focus towards to reach our objectives. I mean, again, I'm just trying to work the top line here, and that seems like something we should figure out. Do you have any guidance for us as to which one of these, for the state, who I'm assuming, but that's not probably true. I was going to say the state's going to give us the most guidance and relative credit and potentially funds, but maybe the feds are involved as well, and I'm not quite sure if I'm even asking a question that has distinctions that make a difference. Can you help me out here?
Yeah, I'm sorry it's really confusing, and I totally agree. And the Planning Commission had a commissioner had a similar question. So maybe we'll start with area median income, which is table A19. So what that is the I'm going to read from my notes. It's a metric that is used to benchmark income levels. The income benchmarks are calculated and adjusted on family and household size. So a single person and a family for their numbers are going to be different.
Right.
So most federal and state housing programs, for someone to participate, Section 8 vouchers, there's
Right.
veterans programs, you have to, your income qualified, your gross annual income. So as part of that process, you have to submit, your income documentation, and that information is reviewed to verify. Do you qualify? But then to benchmark it, to make it similar and not have it all over the place, what they do is they use these benchmark income data that is released by HCD. And the state's area median income, AMI, is used to calculate affordable housing units for applicable housing programs. So in the the townhomes project, using AMI to better understand it, because this is how the programs, how the funding they get works. 24 of the units in this development are affordable to lower income households. That means in order for a household of 4 to be eligible to occupy one of the units, their documented gross annual income cannot exceed $62,300.
So that's on the table. This is graph A19
Yes.
category of things. Wow,
Right.
that's way higher than I thought, and actually good news.
It's a benchmark, though. So
Right.
what they also do is, so state law requires HCD to annually update the AMI based on HUD revisions that they make. And HUD updates their information basically yearly or nearly so. One of those revisions is, if necessary, increase a county's area median income to equal California's non-metropolitan median income. And in 2022, HUD said California's non-metropolitan income was $80,300. So in terms of the income benchmark to qualify to a family of 4 to live in this development, they made that 80,300. So that's the benchmark. But
Right.
you're going to have people, what they're actually bringing home, and their income is going to be less than that, which is what you're seeing, and especially in Table A13, because that's the data that was collected by the U.S. Families, households, individuals completing the census data, and then there's this intermediate American Community Survey where families give information to the federal collectors of this data, and that's what's compiled here. So this would be more reflective of what their actual take home, or their gross income is, not their take home, their gross income is. And then Table A14 it kind of uses a benchmark too. It's a different one. It's this HUD adjusted median family income. Basically what it's showing is 35% of households, 2019, have a immediate income of greater than $52,000. And below that is, 24, 16, 18, 6%. So in the balance of that was below. That's more granular because they like also looking at the poverty levels and more income need is what this one does. It doesn't get as granular as for those that are above these thresholds. Table A14 does make it a little bit more confusing, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, it does. No, I thank you. I think I got it, but just one more weirdism. Table A14, a household income distribution.
Yep.
You've got extremely low, very low, low, and then low and middle income, which low and middle income only has the whole range, which others are, 12, 15, 18,000. The range in that is $149. And of course, there's just about nobody that fits in that. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, that can't be right. You can't have a category that goes from 51,851 to 52,000, and that's the whole category. Is that, how can that be right?
It's how the HUD does this income data. It's how they do fair market rent, how they break that down. They use these income categories, which, if I remember correctly, the poorer you are, the greater amount of subsidies you're eligible for. So I guess folks who are in that low to middle, it's just, you're absolutely right. It's very narrow. And yeah, the folks that would fall into that is such a minute.
So that's not actually a typo. That's actually that's HUD thinking somehow?
Yeah, that's HUD thinking.
I guess I should just go, okay. One last question, if you can bear with me. I didn't see the zoning map anywhere. And does the zoning map, I mean, maybe it's there. I was wandering through. I didn't find it. Are there any changes to the zones? Density, street housing groups or chunks change from one zone to another? Or does that's all staying the same?
It's all staying the same. It's
Good.
not recommended that there be any changes to the parcels changing from one zone to another to allow more development, or changing the development standards, in of themselves within the zones as it is. So there's not a mandate for that. I think there's a program that the council could consider allowing in the R3, increasing the threshold of by right multifamily from 4 units to a higher number, but it's not a mandatory program. And the council could elect to eliminate it altogether if they didn't want to do that. But it's not a mandate. It's a shall consider. So that's a shall consider is not shall do. It's
Right.
not like that. Yeah.
And does that relate to the portions of the zoning code that are constraining or restricting in some manner?
It can be a constraint.
Because you brought that up in your presentation, and I'm just trying to figure out, well, what are those zoning areas?
When that was written, the HCD hadn't published its list on the Housing Crisis Act. So it could very well be that some of that could be, that could have done something to that, but I hadn't looked through it through those lenses. But I think there could be some developments where the four unit threshold could be a constraint. But it, obviously, Mountain Town Homes is, got approved. It's a site with wetlands. There's the Carmen Drive that involved a density bonus. So, the city does have some experience with getting some, making use of some of the state law already through the density bonus. The city has experience getting housing projects and approved that are protective of wetlands, but yet you still gain a lot of units that are affordable. So there is a lot of experience that the city does have. So maybe taking out that optional program might be something the council might want to do.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mayor, I'm sure you're pleased to hear I'm done.
Thank you for ending that. John, comments?
This is beyond thorough and my head hurts reading.
Yeah, I'll comment later. Questions again, Tim? No? No. Okay. So we have to go to public comment. Yes? No hands raised and no one in the audience. Oh.
There's no way
All right, Joanna, you're going to be put on the screen here in a second. Reintroduce yourself and you have 3 minutes.
Really quick, so thank you. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work has gone into this, so thank you. It looks really good. My main concern is that the council consider removing one of the optional RH&A sites, the parcel 057071040, because that particular site, there's a lot of good substitute parcels that can be used. But that site, along with other sites that have been previously removed, like the 057, 051, 010, and 020 parcels were excluded for the same reason, because there's wetlands and waters of the U.S. on that site. So it doesn't make sense that this site, which is all part of the same area, is still on the list if the other two sites were removed. There's pictures, there's flowing waters on this, which are perennial creeks. And anyway, so I would just ask you that you consider removing that from the list, because my concern is that even though this is not a definitive list, things in years to come, things get looked at and people don't know what the intention is by the council in future years, just like we had with the bed and breakfast situation, you know, that I think it was Tim brought up, you know, the intent was there by the council at the time, but it was documented in one section, but not in another. And, you know, going back and trying to figure out council intent years later is difficult. And so it just concerns me that that would be in there because it's inconsistent. Anyway, so if I would ask you to consider just removing that from the draft housing element. Thank you for your consideration.
Johanna, can you hold on a sec?
Yes.
Is that piece of property right next door to yours?
Yes, it is. And it has in my letter to the group, I put in a picture and you can see like over 50% has water on it. And it has more water on it than any of the other parcels that were already now excluded. So it just doesn't make any sense to me that it's even listed.
I just wanted to make sure had it.
Yeah, it's part of that block 49, part of the Golden Eagle parcels.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more public commentators? I mean, people who want to comment on this item? No, none. So we'll close public comment on this item and move to council discussion. Any thoughts before I make my general comment? All right, so I think we were all here for the previous housing element plan. Correct me if you were all here, right? And that was far more controversial, obviously. And through the planning commission process, I'm sure they got some pushback on something, but I'm not sure what those would have been. And at this point, there's only one item that someone has a problem with. We just heard that. So obviously, this is not a particularly aggressive housing element plan that's disturbing to people or controversial, and apparently anyway. I'm going to recommend we just go with city manager's recommendation. Any other thoughts? Then we do need a motion to authorize the city manager to transmit. Anybody? Just gonna read that right there, bottom.
A motion to authorize the city manager to transmit a copy of the draft 2023 through 2031 housing element to the California Department of Housing and Community Development with a 90-day review pursuant to Government Code Section 65585B. By title only.
All right, Redmond has the motion, Stearns the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. All right, we move on to the proposed operating budget for the general fund, fiscal year 23-24, and Muriel will be making the presentation on this item.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Before you is the proposed operating budget for just the general fund at this point. The rest of the funds will come to you in the next meeting. I thought it might be better to break it up so you're not getting it all in one night. So that's what you have before you this evening. For general fund revenues, I'm estimating at 6.014 million, which is about $300,000 higher than the 22-23 budget. There's one main reason for this change. The Proposition 64 funding for next year is $672,000 or $300,000 more than it has been before. It's because we were successful with this grant application. We're going to have the continued funding for the code enforcement officer, a police officer, and an additional task force officer. Additionally, we were approved for $200,000 for computer-aided dispatch and records program, and it's recognized also in the dispatch department expense. So that's going to come out seeming much higher than it usually is, and that's going to be why. In determining expenditures in the general fund, I always start with employees and the benefit costs. For that starting point, authorized positions worksheet is included in this information. As a part of that, I'd already discussed the additional task force officer. It also includes an additional fire department person, and that would be grant funded as well. We haven't had the determination as to whether that particular grant is successful or not. So pending in this budget, I've recognized the revenue for that grant position as well as the funding for that particular position. So once we have approval for that, it'll be an easy step to move forward in getting that person hired. All of the rest of the expenses are fairly consistent from one year to the next. There have been some insurance cost increases for workers' comp, liability, property insurance, and cyber insurance. Fuel costs, as all of us know, have gone up, so we have experienced some higher costs for fuel, which I have anticipated in this budget moving forward. Thus, the difference of the loss that I have budgeted for this year is at $439,000. And for the year that we're going into, which would be the proposed budget for 23-24, at a negative $476,000. Again, as I've discussed before, most of this is due to the salary changes that happened, as you're well aware of, this last year. There are some increases for those salaries due to step increases. There were some slight increases in health insurance cost, which was to be expected. It wasn't as much as I thought it was going to be, so that was actually a good thing. If you have any questions about particular items, please ask. I think that the main takeaway from this in moving forward is that there's going to have to be something done to either decrease expenses, which would mean reducing staff, or the other side of it would be to increase income, which is why I have been talking for several years to increase the transient occupancy tax by at least 2%. We haven't had an increase in TOT tax for more than 20 years. An additional area that I'd like to take a look at is business license tax, which is for most people at about $85 a year. That hasn't changed for many, many years. There is a charge to the downtown parking area. We plow the snow on the sidewalks. The charge for that is $12 per year. I know for a fact that it costs more than $12 a year for each business to have the sidewalks plowed. Where we wind up and for the suggestion for the change for that, I don't know that yet, but we will be putting together a plan to increase some of those what I would call low-hanging fruit to have those increases come forward to you relatively soon.
So I'm going to start questions. So, Muriel, this agenda item is really sort of two parts. Have a discussion about the upcoming budget for the upcoming fiscal year, and then two, go into a resolution regarding an appropriations, which is sort of a technical thing. So we'll have the discussion on the budget right now. Is that
Whatever, however you
okay?
want to
So,
approach it, I'm fine with that.
Let's have the discussion about the budget, go through the process. This is really just sort of a discussion piece, but then we have to move on to approving a resolution regarding an appropriations limit.
Which is basically
It's
a
a
math.
technical thing. We've done it
Yes.
every year.
Yes, indeed, based on growth factors.
All right, so.
And this may be self-evident, but with this budget, we're lagging 2 months behind in revenues.
It's actually, for sales tax, it's actually 4.
Yeah, anyway. So
What do you mean, the actual accrual of that?
our actuals haven't come in.
Yeah, the actuals.
Okay,
If you
so
look at the actuals, you kind
Things
of go,
could be
"Whoa."
better than we think, okay.
Yeah.
So at this point, questions for clarification and so forth before we go to public comment on the budget proposal, and then we'll go to the technical item. So it's almost like two different agenda items as far as I'm concerned, but we'll leave it as is. Questions for Muriel?
To the chair?
Yep.
Hi. Not too many. Less than the previous agenda item. It's a good thing. In the prose description of the budget, the last line is, this creates a reserve of about 16.54% for the 24-25 fiscal year. I assume you mean 23-24?
Yes.
Okay. And going to the last page, just trying to get the big picture of money in and money out, you're estimating our net loss this year at 326, 345, or did I heard a different number that you?
The figure that you're looking at is the mid-year
Right.
budget adjustment. So if you take the final budget that was approved and subtract the mid-year budget adjustment, you come up with the grand total of 439,208.
So this year, we're gonna lose about 439.
Yep.
Unless the accruals come in and help us out a little, right?
Right, that's correct.
Right. What? Yeah, I'm just looking at rough, because Lord knows they change. But just budgeting, one of the things that I was, and I don't know how I was thinking this, but all of us approved these large salary increases. And my thinking process after talking to you was that the amount we would lose every year would go down because they would stay stable and revenue would continue to tick up, and consequently our net loss, all other things being roughly equal, would continue to decline. And I'm just help me out with roughly 440, and all of a sudden it's going up to roughly 475.
Yeah, which is
makes
why I
me-
talked about insurance cost, our workers' compensation cost, and our property liability, or our liability insurance, our property insurance, and our cyber insurance has gone up.
Right.
Dramatically. The increases there were enough to take the difference between the 439 and the 475. We had small savings in other areas, which is great, but when you're dealing with large increases in liability and workers' comp cost, which is typical across, well, at least for SCORE across this part of the state.
Right.
I felt actually pretty good that it wasn't actually worse.
Right. Okay. May I just explore a perspective? We're given the budget proposal, just top line, that we actually went up in the amount that we lost, or approximately, or even roughly the same. That just flat out concerns me. You brought up that we're going to have to cut expenses or grow revenues. Revenues, I feel less. I mean, we can do what we can do to try and grow revenues, which we're already doing. Cutting expenses scares the bejesus out of me. Not trying to cut expenses, but how much we have to cut, because if in year 2 of these large salary increases across the board, we're still flat. And here's what I want to kind of explore conceptually with you is, should we have some kind of, my goodness, we might want to go 2 years out and try and get an idea of what is our exposure to a downstroke relative to our reserve fund 2 years out, to inform us relative to a conversation I know the mayor wants to have, which is adding 2% to the adding to our TOT tax rate instead of 12, taking it up to 14 or somewhere thereabouts, and to bring in revenue that way. And at least I think you do. And I don't mean to be accused.
The TOT tax will have to go to the public for a vote.
Right.
And no, we're talking about going from 10 to 12, correct? Yeah.
Right. Well, 10 to 12 plus the 2 to 2.5, whatever it is that the 2 on the T-bid tax percentage. And so effectively at 14% for somebody who's paying the bill. And and that's a whole other conversation. I'm not trying to get into that. I'm just trying to get enough, suggest that maybe because of course we're asking you to have to do this, to go out a couple of years, and is it going to get dramatically better 2 years from now, or isn't it? And what might that look like in big chunk numbers, such that we can figure out just exactly, well, at least close, how bad is it? In other words, did we really make a big mistake approving all these across the board salary increases? Did we really shoot ourselves right not in the foot? And or is it going to get better fast enough that revenue will come up and this will start to wash out here pretty quickly? And we're just having one bad budgeted year, or no, that's not the case, and sure would like to know. And I'm not asking you to make any commitments now. It was just something to, oh, you're going to cut me off?
I wanted to add some perspective when you're done.
Thanks. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yes, the salary increases were a big hit. It is, it's brought our budget down, obviously lower than it has been in the past years. The thing to remember, though, is good general accounting practices says that cities should have a minimum of 20% reserve. A lot of our neighboring cities don't have any reserves, and that, to me, is ludicrous. I don't want to run this down. I want to make sure we have as much in reserve as possible, but we're talking about, and Muriel can talk about the numbers, but I believe we're running a reserve in the 40% range, okay?
It would go down to 16.5%.
Yeah,
at the end of this year.
We're projected to be at about 26% at the end of the year that we're in right now. And then at the end of 23-24, barring any revenue changes or any other large types thing that would happen, we would be at 16.45%.
And, okay, so I just wanted to put that into perspective, that you're right to raise these questions, but I think I've said my piece. I'm not going to go into it anymore.
Okay, so these are clarifying questions regarding the budget. John, Tim? No. All right, so let's go to public comment regarding the budget. Nobody here in the audience and no one on Zoom. Okay. So let's bring it back to council regarding the budget for 23-24. My impression is that staff is looking for some direction with respect to, one, cutting costs, or two, trying to increase revenues, particularly through at this point, a TOT tax. So, discussion. Anyone want to say anything regarding this?
From my perspective, the budget that's being presented to us, proposed budget, is a reasonable budget. We have known for some time that we were going to go into the red on an annual basis with the budget. And for some time, we have talked about the need to increase revenue. And hopefully, we will act in 2024 to do exactly that.
I feel the same way. So we're talking acting in 2023 for the 24 budget. And so Muriel hinted, more than hinted, she mentioned the TOT tax, but other fees that she'll analyze with respect to possible increases. That doesn't sound like you're looking to be draconian regarding the increases, and in light of the fact that many of those fees have not been adjusted upwards for a couple decades, it's not totally unjustified. There is inflation, and the city has to deal with inflation, whether it's from vendors and suppliers, and obviously through labor costs, and then the labor, including the labor costs besides just wages. So, I guess from my perspective, we could have an attitude of, well, we've been slow to do this analysis and take into account inflation, and in order to have staff that's stable and wants to be working here, we've had to make these wage increases. And so we're now going to have to look at adjusting upwards some of our tax rates and fee schedules. And I'm not going to sit here and say we're undertaxed in Mount Shasta, especially since we're in the state of California, or that we're underfeed here, but I think I've made it clear that over the decades, Mount Shasta has been slow to do what it takes regarding revenues to improve infrastructure and to have a stable, strong city staff to provide the services that I think ultimately everyone really wants. So I'm going to second Tim's notion that we focus more on the fee and revenue side. My feeling is if we do it does pass, let's say it will have to be it'll have to be a 50% plus one, since it's a general revenue tax. Okay, so assuming that does pass, it's going to be worth somewhere between between $300,000 and $400,000. Okay, yeah, and that will help out a lot, just that.
Well, it'll wipe out the.
Yeah, and so that's where I lean. So the main cost-cutting mechanism would be to outright cut staff members. And we've worked really hard over the last 4 to 8 years to go from quasi-volunteer staffing, particularly with the fire department, and somewhat underpaid professionals in dispatch and PD and public works, to competitively paid, hopefully more permanent and stable employees that
Are competent.
that are competent and wanting to get more competent and help us out going forward. So I'm pretty sure that starting to cut people would be a big morale buster. And so I think we try the revenue increase side of this equation first. If the economy really does tank, which some people are predicting, then we'll have to go to expense side cost cutting. So it's one thing. Let's try revenue first. That's where I am. Revenue first, and then if that doesn't work, because it only will not work if the economy really has a severe recession downturn. Maybe not as bad as 2008 and 9, but just bad, and our revenues stay flat or actually go down. Then we would be in trouble and would need to cut costs. But I'm not that bearish yet.
No.
And not yet, not for Mount Shasta.
Right.
Maybe for San Francisco. I've been there, it's getting a little scary. Really high vacancies, et cetera. But, and all these retailers just leaving. It's like, well, that's a lot of sales tax revenue that's going away in that town. So we don't really have that exit phenomenon going on, which is good. And I drive to town 3 days a week, and we don't have a lot of departures nor planned departures, so of any substance. And then vacant storefronts get filled in pretty quickly. So it's still looking pretty bullish as far as I'm concerned. So anyhow, that's my bit on this situation.
To the chair?
Yes.
I wanted to, first of all, I want to talk to the city manager for a second, just to make, and fellow council members, to make really clear what I was saying and what I'm not saying. I am not suggesting, based on the numbers that Muriel presented us, that we have staff cuts. Just so we're clear, I'm not suggesting that. I'm right in line with what the mayor has said is, step one, we have a revenue. If it looks bad, because I don't know what the next 2 years look like, but if it looks bad, we have a revenue option that if we need to, we can use. That being the TOT 2% tax increase, which will bring $300,000-400,000 in, and our deficit disappears, in effect, roughly, give or take a little. On the other hand, just so we're clear where I am coming from, is because our mayor does speak to so many people 3 days a week or more, and getting the temperature, I started to walk and talk to business owners. And I was frankly surprised, and I won't go long into this because it's off topic to some degree, but I was pretty surprised by how much pushback business owners say how outrageous a lot of our business fees are. For instance, a specific proposal to put a food truck on a Friday and a Saturday night in front of their business from 6 to 10 o'clock. It was $1,250 to consider the idea. And so they just abandoned it. And I've heard a number of people tell me that what they learned in Mount Shasta is You don't go to City Hall and present your ideas, or even for that matter, file for plans to change things, and you don't follow the law. You go ahead and just do it and beg for forgiveness. And it's a discussion I'd like to have more, and I'm kind of glancing over at you, John. I'm not trying to reel you into this, but it's one of those relative to raising revenue. Let's take the whether or not certain fees are too high or too low off the table, as much as relative to raising revenue and what would actually address significant shortfalls that you've just presented to us. It seems to me that the primary way to do that, and probably going to be 90+% of that way of doing it, is going to be through a TOT tax increase. I'm not saying that there aren't some things that can't be raised. Don't know those details, don't have them in front of me, haven't thought about it. But I've also been bumping into a lot of folks that said, we just don't try and grow our business with this or that because the fees are crazy and that it takes way too much time. And I'm not trying to blame staff on any level, because we're a small town and hey, we only have so many to go around, not to mention the fact that we don't have a planner still, and that makes things much more difficult. I was just trying to bring a frame of reference to where revenue potentially might be raised and what was more realistic. And I just wanted to kind of throw that out to everybody.
Well, I agree. The TOT tax probably it needs to pass, and that would be the majority of the revenue enhancement for sure. With respect to that fee for the truck, that's going to be similar to the fee to put a parklet in, right? Because you're taking, if the truck's taking parking spaces.
I'm actually not familiar with that, what you're talking about, what that fee is.
So if there's going to be a food vending truck,
okay,
and you've seen them, they parked across the street from Berryville, but they weren't in parking stalls. So I think the business you're talking about is on the 400 block of Mount Shasta, the fairly new one.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's going to be parked in parking spaces. So that's akin to a parklet situation. We charge for the parklets like $2,400 a year for.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is something like that. Every time someone comes out and does fee comparisons, including water rates and sewage rates, Mount Shasta was just flat out low. And the rate increase, so PACE helped us with rate increases, and it brought us to a middling ground. So we're not awfully high. And Giuliano, she would do all these rate increases, and I think it was mainly her, but maybe the prior what's his name? The prior Public Works director did too, but Rod. And they based all those rates on other cities of a similar type. So I'm not really sure our rates are awful compared to other cities, but I am absolutely positive people think our rates are too high. Whether it's putting up a sign, changing a sign, the fees to get a permit to do electrical, there's no question about that. I hear that all day, every other week, that type of thing. Yeah.
Well, if I may.
And I try to say something like, well, I'm not really sure we're that bad. But they don't care. There's sticker shock, on all these things.
Well, but there's another piece of this equation, and I'll be specific about this. Kevin Flynn went down, opened up a restaurant in Reading. Their fees were higher than our fees. Not by much, but they were higher. But they also cut them in half and paid for half of those fees for him to open up his restaurant. So his net number, even though the printed fees were higher, his net number was way lower. And just
so do they have
They have an economic development zone.
There we go, and they have funds set aside to subsidize these things.
Well, it gets into a larger conversation.
Which we
isn't
could
a-
talk about having that, you
Right.
turn DEAC into something else than what it currently is.
But
and
they
something to
get,
talk about.
they've got a lot of grant funds and state funds that pay for that economic development zone.
It's just, we have all stated, we're all pro-business, and we are.
Yep.
It's just how do we actually do that such that folks, we grow businesses here, because that's,
We've done that experiment. Remember, I think you were part of it, where we reduced the,
housing fees and sewer hookup fees.
it's actually considered the impact fees.
Impact fees.
And we did a complete moratorium on them.
75% down,
75% down.
didn't do a darn thing.
Yes, it did. We had a lot more things moving into the city. As
Okay,
far as
well,
yeah. That period where all these storefronts filled up and these restaurants moved in.
Oh, I'm talking about something different.
Oh.
Yeah,
No.
Yes,
it helped.
yes, it does.
And so the city's kind of filled up with respect to available storefronts, and what we really want to see now is, infill, combination of commercial and residential. It's not really happening, which is a bummer, really is. Just drive down the road and you'll see an empty lot, right? And some of them have been like that for a long time, and I'd be really happy to see some moves to fill in these things, and that's not happening. And it wasn't happening when we had the moratorium on the fees. Yeah, so tread lightly on the fees with respect to revenue enhancement. Okay, makes sense.
Is it?
So with regard to this part of the agenda item, are you looking for direction? I think we're, John, you want to chime in since you're a business owner?
Yeah.
Do you have direction, or we're not really going to vote on anything on this part, right?
That's it. We want to make sure that we're on the right track, and to get feedback, which we're getting.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think revenue first,
Yeah. Right.
cost cutting second. John, do you want your fees to go up in any way?
We want fees down and, business to go through the roof, but that doesn't always work out. But I'm just wondering if it comes down to cutting employees, I don't think so much city employees, how much money can we save by cutting out some projects at Pace? Don't we actually have an engineer now through the Public Works to do some of that work?
Yeah.
At a cheaper rate?
Yeah, and he is picking up some small projects. Where we're likely to see the benefit is he's been able to chase grants that require an engineer to do the calculations. And he's been working with grant writers in that regard, and we've have several grants that we're working on right now. The library expansion grant went in with help from a bunch of folks on the library expansion committee. 3 projects looking for federal funding for 3 drainage infrastructure projects, which then may mean that our drainage impact fee could be lower if we are awarded. We are looking at electrification grant, creating a partnership with Caltrans and a private entity that is willing to put 20% into the cost for an alternative fuels charging network at the southern end of town. That Caltrans has said that if we get this grant, they will work not only closely with us, but also look at the potential for reconstructing the interchange with 89, which if we do that right and we expand that interchange in the right way and allow for more capacity, what that does is sets us up for when the landing is developed, that we don't have to end up doing what's called an interchange area management plan, where before they will allow us to do anything at the landing, we either pay for those improvements or they shut down that on and off ramp until the traffic situation is resolved. So this is a way, this grant, for instance, is a way to help get Caltrans in the door, and they've pledged that they'll work on that interchange and address traffic at the southern end of town. So it's going to pay dividends. It's just more down the road. But PACE is expensive. We've got some big projects that we need to close out with them. You know, the kind of stuff that we would normally call PACE in for when we start enforcing, you know, sidewalk deficits and, you know, curbs and gutters and that kind of thing. That's stuff that would normally go to PACE that can be done in-house in terms of calcs and figuring out what percentage of the damages are, you know, somehow attributable to the city. But there are other things too that he's adding in terms of doing jobs in-house that we normally would ask PACE to do. I would like to expand that footprint though.
See that as a nice cost cutting
Yeah.
effort right there.
Or, I mean, nobody wants to change full ships. I mean, we also could go out and, like other cities that I've worked at, besides we've got PACE as our engineer of record, and I think we want to keep that. But many cities, we vet other types of firms that do, you know, certain things that may have overlap with PACE, and we have them as on-call, so we don't necessarily have to go out for a bid for that. And in some cases, when we've got a job, instead of automatically going to the one source, if we have this on-call list, we can pull somebody up that's cheaper. And that's something that I'd like to explore.
In general, you okay with taking a shot at the TOT tax increase? Okay.
We've done that for 20-some years.
So,
We've got to do something.
you know, I don't want to state the obvious, but that's generally going to be tourists that are paying to help out the city. So, so I hope that's, well, this is general sense. We'll look at increasing revenues appropriately.
Yep.
But TOT being the main part of that. Look at reasonable cost cutting now, like you just had the conversation with John, and then if things don't go well, we'll have to look at major cost cutting later. So can we move on to the second part of this agenda item, which is regarding this is a technical thing. We vote on this every year, an appropriations limit regarding the fiscal year 23-24. Go ahead, Muriel.
So before you is a resolution to approve an appropriations limit, which basically takes the figure that we had last year and is multiplied by a growth factor to say we can't go over this new amount. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I don't have that printed out in front of me. But our general fund revenue and expenses never get to that point. It's at over, I believe, $10 million right now. So we're nowhere near that, but as an operation of law, we're supposed to do this each and every year. So here it is.
Questions for Muriel? You don't feel like spending $10 million? No. Okay. Yeah, we can be like the federal government and just start selling bonds, right? See how that goes. Tim?
I move that we approve the resolution.
Well, we definitely have to go to public comment on this first, Tim, right?
Actually, this is the same agenda item, isn't it?
So we've had public comment. Good enough. Well, I was going to have public comment on this because it was sort of a two-part agenda item, but we're good? Nobody else. I'd like to. Thank you.
Move approval or adoption of resolution CCR 23-14. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Mount Shasta establishing an appropriations limit for fiscal year 2023-2024.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Move on to agenda item number 10, which will be the first reading of ordinance CCO-23, number to be determined, amending chapter 10.44.08 of the municipal code regarding a parking situation at Sisson Baseball Field. Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. The parking lot at Sisson Youth Baseball Park was intended to be utilized for short-term parking for citizens to enjoy the youth sports at the park. Further, the parking area has been designated as a city snow parking area for citizens to park their vehicles during snow removal times. However, the parking area has seen an increase in long-term parking and abandoned or inoperative vehicles parked up there, which has led to many of the people participating in youth sports not being able to park in the parking area and have to park other places to go there. I've received numerous complaints from the organizers of the youth baseball for Little League, as well as Shannon Shaw, the director here. She's received numerous complaints about abandoned, dilapidated vehicles. I've also received complaints from the school about people camping overnight in there, and when kids are showing up to school, there's people out there living in the parking lots and stuff. This amendment would make parking lot a time-restricted parking lot, so there would be no parking allowed between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Again, there's no businesses in the area. There's nothing for people to go doing or any reason for them to be up there at night. There's no lighting or any of that kind of stuff. It's in a residential school neighborhood. Two exceptions to this parking time restriction would be that during snow removal time, which is typically between November 1st and April 30th, or whenever designated by the city, the Public Works Director, that the parking time limits would be not in play, just like they are in our 72-hour parking lot. Doesn't exist during snow removal. The second would be if there was a special event or something and they had the permission of the city manager or his designee, they could waive the time requirements. Essentially, this allows us to be able to keep the parking lot available for students and youth to use the park facilities.
Thank you, Chief. Questions for staff on this? It's pretty clear. All right, this is a public hearing. Is public for this? All right, so we'll open up public comment. There's no one in the audience here at the venue. And no hand raised on the Zoom feature here. And so we will close public comment and bring it back for further discussion if necessary here with the council.
As the mayor pointed out, this is a very straightforward ordinance, and I would move this ordinance, proposed ordinance of the City Council of the City of Mount Shasta, amending section 10.44080 of the Mount Shasta Municipal Code to a second reading. By title only, yes, that's right.
We have a motion from Stearns, a second by Redmond. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. It goes on to a second reading. And we move on to agenda item number 11. Does anyone have an outside report regarding an outside meeting that they would like to report on? All right, I'll be going to the center, the interpretive center meeting tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes. Todd mentioned a grant opportunity for the library. I did attend a library meeting regarding that, and as he said, the application has gone in. It's a very important grant opportunity. Hopefully we do get all or at least most of the monies.
By the end, trying not to be biased, it's a great application.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think there are many libraries out there that have the level of calculations that we do in terms of energy savings.
Okay,
over time.
great. Great, we shall see. Hopefully that all comes in for us and we can move on with a nice project for the library. something that's been in the works for many years, actually. All right, moving on to the future agenda items. It looks like at the beginning of, looks like in June, we'll be looking at the budget again to finalize next year's budget. That's A. B is regarding amendments that's for SB2 planning grants. C is resolution calling for consolidation of the election, so that should be interesting. And then D, resolution requesting a local measure to be placed on the ballot. Obviously, those two are related, I think. E, vacation of Field Street, that's been pending for a while. F, discussion and possible action regarding McLeod Avenue parking prohibition. And lastly, city newsletter, G.
I do have a question. In terms of the resolution requesting a local measure be placed on the ballot, what is contemplated there?
In terms of a schedule?
No, the local measure. What is the local measure?
That the TOT?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So we'll be discussing that.
And we have just,
Yeah.
the county's just released the election schedule and due dates, and John Kenny has it.
And then we have a future item over 90 days regarding extraction of water and so forth. So it's time to adjourn without objection. The city council meeting for May 22nd is adjourned.